Hello. Welcome to Andy Tales. After watching the video, make sure there's no one else in the room. Don't forget to write your city and the time in the comments.
The Nightmare at Walmart.
I had always thought of night shifts as something ordinary. For a long time, Walmart was just a place where I worked, not something that would make me anxious. I took the night shift because it was easier to balance work with school, and at night, the store wasn't crowded, which meant I could do my job quietly without all the noise and bustle. However, despite all that, I never really felt safe, especially during those moments when there was absolutely no one around. But something told me that this emptiness hid something more than I could imagine. Anyway, I had come to this moment. It was almost 11:30 at night, and my shift was nearly over. Time seemed to drag on, and that night, it was especially hard to keep my composure. I sat at the cash register, staring at the shelves of products, trying to occupy myself with something to distract me from the thought of how much I hated working that night. I'd always thought of night shifts as being a bit thrilling, a little mystical. Not that I believed in the supernatural, but there was something about the dark corners of stores that always made me feel uncomfortable. Maybe it was just fatigue talking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I sat there and glanced at the clock, 11:15 p.m. I didn't know that those minutes, which I was desperately trying to drag out, would become the strangest and most frightening of my life. I looked at the empty aisles again, with it being late outside. The store was nearly deserted. There were rarely any customers at this hour, except for those who needed something urgently or those who found the quiet hours useful for their own purposes. But despite all that, I felt like something was wrong. At first, it was just a faint feeling of unease, something strange in the air. Maybe it was just too much silence. I sat back in the chair behind the register and stared at the shelves. I seemed to be listening to even my own footsteps. When everything is so quiet, you start hearing the smallest sounds, and you begin to search for their source. I thought nothing of it, but the feeling of being watched was still there. It wasn't just anxiety, it was something else, a feeling that someone was staring at me, like someone's eyes were glued to my back, and I couldn't figure out who it was. I looked around. The entire store was empty, clean shelves, no signs of movement. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. It wasn't something I could explain. It was just there. I couldn't ignore it. I glanced again, and then I saw him, a man. He was standing at the far corner, almost in the shadows, by the media shelves. He was so hidden that I didn't notice him right away. But once his figure came into my line of sight, I felt that strange sensation again. That cold feeling creeping over me. He was standing still, as if frozen in time, wearing a dark jacket and with dark hair. His face was hidden in the shadow, and I couldn't make out his features, but his eyes. I couldn't help but notice his eyes. They were staring at me. Those eyes, they weren't alive. There was no expression in them. It was like something dead, cold. I felt a chill run down my spine. My heart started beating faster, and my legs turned to jelly. I decided I needed to do something. I tried to focus on my work, but the thought that this man was still watching me made it hard to concentrate. I walked past the aisles, trying not to think about it, but no matter how much I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes were still on me. I didn't understand how he was doing it. He stood there so quietly, so silently, that I almost couldn't believe he was real, but I couldn't escape the feeling of his presence, even though he was so far away and nearly invisible. I looked in his direction again. He was still there. His eyes were still watching every move I made. I could feel my unease growing. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but the thought wouldn't leave me. I started to move, trying to distance myself from that area. But somehow, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching. It seemed like I could feel him moving when he started coming toward me. That moment was strange. His steps were almost inaudible, like he was moving not across the floor, but through the air. He didn't make any sudden movements, but the sensation that he was getting closer was so real that I couldn't ignore it. My heart tightened in fear, and I instinctively took a step back. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew I needed to leave. This man didn't look like an ordinary customer. He stood there, in the shadows, watching me, and it was becoming harder and harder to stay calm. I walked toward the register, grabbed my bag, and hurried toward the exit. With each step, each glance behind me, I felt that he was getting closer. When I reached the door, I could feel him moving. He wasn't far. I pressed myself against the door, trying to open it faster, but he was already near. I swear I could hear his breathing getting louder, and the air around me grew colder. I rushed out the back door, not looking back, and stopped, trying to catch my breath. My legs were weak, and my hands were still trembling. I stood there in the dark, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was somewhere nearby. I couldn't see him, but I felt his presence, like a shadow hanging over me. Then, I heard his voice. "You're not leaving that easily." The whisper was low and cold, almost like it was coming from the very shadows. I froze, but didn't dare turn around. I knew that if I did, I would see something I would never forget. I could feel his gaze, even though I couldn't see him, and the longer I stood there, the stronger the sensation grew. My hair stood on end. I felt like I was being suffocated by his presence. Without turning, I grabbed my bag and ran to my car. I got in, my hands shaking as I started the engine, but I didn't drive away right away. My heart was still racing, and when I glanced in the rearview mirror, I froze. I saw him again, in the reflection. He was there, standing in the darkness, as if he hadn't moved at all, and his eyes, those same cold eyes, were still watching me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was too much. I couldn't stay there any longer. With great effort, I put the car in gear and drove off, not looking back. But in the mirror, his eyes kept following me.